Blended Podcasts. Brought to you by Blended Audio.
Exploring the unexplained,
breaking down barriers,
putting the macabre under the microscope,
dissecting the disturbing,
seeking out the sinister,
bringing you the jinkies and the jump scares.
Hello and welcome back to Freaky Friday.
Woohoo!
Show hosted by me, Megan, and my co-host,
Devin.
And this week we have a really exciting topic that I know you are itching to get into.
I am so jazzed for this one.
And considering we have had the pleasure of actually exploring one or two places and getting that just experience of investigating, we're now going to be talking about our ideal wish list investigation places and locations. And yeah, I know you mentioned in the previous episode something you are dying to get into and could talk a year about is the Stanley Hotel. So why don't you take it away?
Yes, the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. It's a hotel high up in the mountains. It's, I think, about 5 miles from the Rocky Mountain National Park, I believe it's called. Yeah, so it's high up in the mountains, and it was actually inspiration for one of my favorite novels ever, which is The Shining, written by Stephen King. So that's like where my interest was first piqued when I came to the Stanley Hotel, because one of the first horror movies I watched was The Shining, and that's another thing I could talk about forever.
We'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, so that's where my interest was piqued when I came to the Stanley Hotel. And then I remember Ghost Hunters, the show, which was the thing that got me into paranormal investigation, actually investigated there. And they got, at that point in time, it was still early days of paranormal investigation shows, just got some phenomenal evidence. So obviously I was like, okay, sign me up.
Diving right onto that boat.
Yeah, but a bit of history about the Stanley Hotel. It was built by a man named Freeland Oscar Stanley, so obviously the namesake. And it was initially a resort for people who suffered from pulmonary tuberculosis.
Oh, damn.
It was almost like a retreat for them to go, be up in the cool mountain air, So that's what it started out as, and it was opened on the 4th of July, 1909. And it's still operational to this day. You can still go stay there.
It's been staying there quite a while.
Yeah, no. And I mean, my ideal thing would be to go there for like a week. Just book into all of the haunted rooms.
Oh, gosh.
And I think that was also one of the reasons I enjoyed the Lord Milner Hotel in Mikey's Fonteyn so much, is it had a very like Stanley Hotel vibe to it. But yeah, like I said, it was actually inspiration for the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. Stephen King actually stayed there.
Oh my word, okay, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so he had this idea for, I think at the time the novel was called Dark Shine. So he had this rough idea, and he'd been told about the Stanley Hotel and decided to go check it out. I believe he and his wife only stayed there for one night. And they were booking into the hotel around the end of the season, so they were shutting the hotel down for the season, and they were pretty much
scary.
Yeah, they were pretty much the only people there, very much like the Torrance family in The Shining.
See, that's a setup right there for the horror movie.
Yeah, so he and his wife actually stayed in one of the most haunted rooms, which was room 217.
On purpose?
I'm not sure, actually. It didn't say anything in the research that I conducted beforehand, but yeah, he and his wife stayed there. And this room was supposedly haunted by a woman named Elizabeth Wilson, who was a housekeeper in the early days of the hotel. And apparently during a storm in, I think, 1911, she was injured while lighting a lantern. And she didn't die, but I think broke both of her ankles.
Oh, my word.
Or, broke her ankles, was really badly injured, didn't die, but she reportedly still haunts the room to this day. And she will apparently do stuff like unpack people's luggage, which to me doesn't sound like the worst thing.
It's quite sweet, actually.
Yeah, so she unpacks people's luggage, she moves stuff around, and turns the lights on and off. And apparently, she's a bit old-fashioned. She'll if there are two guests that are unmarried and they're sharing a bed in the room, she reportedly climbs into bed between them, and they can feel like a cold presence lying between them and separating them.
Oh no, that would be the end of me. I would not stay.
Yeah. So she apparently haunts the room, and there's a big myth surrounding the room that you can't rent the room out, or you can't have it for the evening. It's never available, but that's apparently a whole lie.
Okay.
So if you're visiting the Stanley Hotel, you can request room 217.
I definitely will not.
I feel like that's the first room I would go to. But yeah, so after that night of Stephen King, spending the night there, he said he went down to the bar at one point in the evening, spoke to a bartender named Grady, who is also the bartender in The Shining. And he said by the time he got upstairs, he had this whole idea for The Shining in his head. And that night went to bed and had a dream of his son being chased down the hallways by, I think it was a fireman's hose or something. Something really bizarre, but he had this dream of his kid being chased down the hallways, and The Shining was born.
That's really cool when they actually base it off of something that's real and something they've gone through and experienced.
Yeah, and I think that was, it's common knowledge that Stephen King wasn't a big fan of Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining, and one of the things was that the hotel they used in The Shining was so different from the Stanley Hotel. So, yeah. So another really haunted place in the hotel is apparently the Vortex, and it's a staircase between floors in the hotel's main guest house. And apparently there's a lot of natural spirit energy there. And is apparently also known as a rapid transit system for ghosts that are known to haunt the hotel.
Okay, that's a little scary.
Yeah. Another big one that I think is probably like one of the scariest places in that hotel is they have sort of like an underground tunnel system.
I'm already out. Anything underground, nope.
Because the hotel is, as far as I understand it, built against the mountain. So in these tunnels, you've got the bare mountain rock as the walls, And I remember that being something that stood out to me in Ghost Hunters, is that they were in these tunnel systems, and there was a hole in the wall, I believe, and they could hear voices. This is a very long time ago, so I'm just going off memory, but they could hear voices, and one of the investigators sort of half climbed into the hole, held out his recorder and yelled hello, and clear as day you could hear a little girl's voice saying hello, hello, and responding to them. So to me,
no.
To me, that is just like the scariest place to investigate, and I would love to. But I mean, the hotel itself is just, there are so many rooms and places that are haunted. Another one is room 401. And apparently the fourth floor at one point was like an attic. All one thing. It was an attic and eventually got turned into rooms. And I think there are about 140 something rooms in the hotel.
Place sounds like a bit of a hotspot for ghost activity.
Yeah, so I mean, in room 401, people can apparently hear children running around, laughing, giggling, and there's apparently a famous closet that opens and closes by itself.
Avoiding that room too.
I can't remember exactly, but I know also in the Ghost Hunters episode, one of them slept in this room and there was a lot of activity. I can't be sure if it was room 401 specifically, but someone had a glass of water next to the bed that they recorded moving by itself. And I believe one of them caught the closet door opening and closing. So...
no, it definitely sounds like a hotspot.
Yeah. So then there's room 428. Seems like the fourth floor is...
yeah, no kidding. I'm avoiding that floor altogether.
And the article that I actually read regarding all of these things said that, like, room 428 is the scariest, most haunted room. And it's apparently the most booked out room of all the haunted rooms.
Do people do this on purpose, or do they just walk in unknowingly?
A lot of people go into the hotel looking for, like, an experience, a paranormal experience. They have ghost tours around the Stanley Hotel now. But in room 428, a lot of people hear footsteps above them, furniture moving, but a lot of and this is all happening above them, so on the roof. Yeah. And a lot of the people that work in the hotel say it's impossible because of the slant of the roof. You can't move stuff around. You can't walk around. But apparently there's a really friendly cowboy that lives in this room.
Okay.
A cowboy who stands at the end of your bed and watches you sleep.
That's not friendly in my books.
Well, I mean, I don't think he's hurt anyone.
Great.
So he just watches you sleep, make sure you're doing okay.
Oh, is that all? Okay, I'll sign me right up.
Yeah, so going back to the underground caves, they actually do a lot of the ghost tour in those underground tunnels and caves. And you don't have to be a hotel guest to go on the tour.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So, I mean, that's on the list as well. I want to do a ghost tour around the Stanley, even if I'm not investigating it myself. But back in the day, these tunnels were used for the workers at the hotel just to, like, move through and move things in and out of the hotel. Another thing is that the rock in the mountain has a higher than average concentration of limestone and quartz, which is also a big inductor of paranormal activity. So that also explains a lot of...
there's a lot for them to draw on there, I guess.
Yeah, so, I mean, there are hundreds, well, not hundreds, but there are plenty of rooms and spaces within the Stanley Hotel, and I could go on forever, but... yeah, that's my ideal place to investigate. And like I said, I just touched on a couple of the things, but I think even a week there, you could get so much evidence.
Yeah, I think you're going to definitely walk away with a jackpot.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I want to hear about your ideal investigation location.
Well, funny enough, I think if I had to pick anywhere, it would be the small little town I grew up in called Kimberley. And for those of you who don't know, it's the largest city in the Northern Cape.
I did not know that.
And if you say that word to anybody, the first thing they're going to say to you is, the big hole.
Yeah.
And yes, funny enough, that's actually the spot I would go to, the big hole. I've been there enough times to conduct the tour myself. And although they've made it sort of like a tourist spot now, it always was. But when I was still small, it wasn't quite what it is today. They've built a whole thing out of it. It used to be very simplistic back in the day and literally just include parts of the old town, and it was pretty much its original site, just made like they would allow people to walk through. Like I said, nowadays they've built a whole thing out of it. They've made a tour of it. There's a bridge that goes out over the hole. That never used to exist. You used to walk up alongside it and peer in. But the history of the big hole actually is quite a traumatic one for a lot of the miners. And in my mind, I don't know, I just have this feeling, there is a feeling when you arrive there that there is so much going on paranormal-wise, and it would make sense to me. You've got all the old original houses and buildings there. They haven't taken those down.
Oh, wow.
All they've done is sort of, you can even walk into them. They've just like put little ropes up where you can't walk into the rooms, but you can stand in the center, peer into each room. Sometimes they'll put mannequins in there. Those
That's terrifying.
Out. But there's this whole feeling and vibe from the moment you walk in there. So, I'm pretty sure it's quite well known, but Kimberley has quite a historical significance due to its mining past and the siege during the Second World War. And there's a lot of genuine ghost sightings and stories around the town. Like I said, it's a very old town, and it's been slow to develop. They've kept a lot of the old original buildings. I think the Star of the West pub is, if I'm not mistaken, the oldest pub.
Oh wow, so that's probably pretty haunted as well.
That would definitely probably go on the list. So there's things in the city centre, and then lying right outside of Kimberley is Margot's Fonteyn battlefield. And they say, I have never been there at night, but as you go there are all the trenches that were dug and built during the Second World War, and if you're there at night, and over 50% of the guests who have visited this location will confirm this, walk away telling you these stories, that you can hear battle cries, you can hear gunshots, you can hear the bagpipes playing. And also it was quite a traumatic thing, so I think you would definitely find quite a few
souls hanging around.
Exactly, reliving those horrible moments. And there's also a lot of items left over from that, like bullet shells and things. So those are like nice trigger objects also too. But yes, I think I would probably start at the big hole itself. British businessmen like Cecil John Rhodes and Barney Bonato, they made their fortunes in Kimberley by establishing the diamond company De Beers.
Yeah.
De Beers is a very big thing in Kimberley. And yeah, that was in the early days after the new rush was sparked by the discovery of the Eureka diamond by Erasmus Jacobs on his father's farm. So that means like miners arrived in the thousands, and they began digging in this hill where a few diamonds had been brought up. And as more and more miners arrived and it sparked off this huge thing, the hill disappeared and slowly became a hole. And yeah, the big hole is said to be the largest hand-dug hole in the world.
Oh, wow.
Though I know there are people who dispute that. But yes, that is the big hole's claim, that it is the largest man-dug hole in the world. I know it got to certain points where the ground just started caving in. So you had tons of miner deaths where they would fall into those waters. So if you ever visit the big hole, you'll see there's this huge lake at the bottom of it. And also with the angle and steeps of the slopes, once you're in, you're not getting out. So Kimberley very quickly became a city during this time, and partly due to the massive African migration to the area. Immigrants were accepted with open arms because they provided a means of cheap labor for De Beers to go, for them to get all the diamonds. The miners' lives were really traumatic things. The housing locations they were assigned, there was like no natural water sources or proper waste disposal. They had this strategy called if I'm right, the Kawata strategy, and that is they used that sort of just to get through the work, the amount of fear that would go with them going down into the mines. It would help them get through that, but it was characterized by really abusive and unruly behavior. It was linked with violence and oppression and hatred and exploitation and suffering. So you've got all that really negative energy going on all around.
It's like a breeding ground for paranormal activity.
Exactly that. Mixed in with the fear of them having to go down into these mine shafts.
Wow.
Their health was also shocking. There were so many different illnesses that spread around them, like TB, pneumonia, scurvy, diarrhea, syphilis, and then you had mining accidents, accidents in the tramways with explosives going off, the cages that they traveled in. So yeah, to me, I don't know, having all these like emotions and this amount of terror and fear and just like
and death
around you, I just feel there's got to be so much linked to the big hole.
Yeah, definitely.
And probably what contributes to the feeling of when you walk in there. And then yeah, like I said, I would definitely around that old town. They've pretty much kept most of it intact as it is. Yeah. They've added on some things. You've got the old original mine shafts and things from there. They have added this section to the tour where they simulate you going down into a mine shaft, down into the actual mine, and then you walk through. It's very much a simulation.
Yeah, it still sounds terrifying.
Exactly. So yeah, I would definitely go there, or maybe walk around Kimberley a little bit, and then most certainly go out to the Fonteyn battlefields because I think Kimberley's history has just got a lot of traumatic past. I know that Fonteyn battle was a bit of a massacre for the British. I think that was in October 1899 when Kimberley was besieged. That was at the beginning of the war. The British ended up building these concentration camps in Kimberley to house the Boer women and children. And as the battle went on, it became like a bit imperative to try and get supplies in because, I mean, that's the point of a siege, isn't it? Just to stop all supplies and anything and trying to wait out until the city would surrender. But So as supplies became scarce and the diamond mining town began to suffer a little bit, and on the fateful night that sort of brought an end to it, the British had believed that the enemy was encamped in slopes up on the surrounding hills of Fonteyn, and they were pretty confident in their superior artillery, and they were pretty sure they could win. And I believe that they were very horribly wrong about that, because the Boers were actually camped in the trenches down in the fields.
Yeah.
So as the British sort of advanced, they I think they did that at just before daybreak. It was still quite dark. They were met by just a wall of rifle fire. A lot of them were taken down that way. Those who weren't were trapped where they were, because if they stood up, they were taken down. So if they weren't killed by rifle fire, they were killed by exposure. It was just an absolute massacre for them. I think Kimberley's quite a hot spot all around. I know there's all these other stories of other places. There's this huge monument in the middle of the city. I would always pass it on my way to school, and that's called the Honoured Dead Memorial for all the soldiers that were lost during the war. And I do believe that from this giant memorial, there are tunnels leading down into the city, all throughout the city.
Ooh.
So
that would be fun to investigate.
Exactly. There's other things. I know there's in the huge library in the town, there's said to be a ghost there that will knock books off of the shelves.
Wow, so he clearly never worked there.
Actually, if I remember correctly, it was somebody who did work there, but he was messing with the accounts, and so took arsenic.
What now?
There's also there's this old museum that there's a handful of schools in Kimberley, and if you ever do a field trip, it'll always be to this museum.
We've got one of those in East London.
Yeah. The McGregor Museum. There's also this feeling when you arrive there. And it's said that in that museum there is I believe a nurse who walks around on the balconies. There's so many spots all around Kimberley. So just as I think it would be cool for us to just arrive and spend some time there and hit each of these locations separately. Yeah. Also, I don't think Kimberley is very targeted with paranormal investigators. It's so unknown and out of the way.
There are the big locations in South Africa, like the Castle of Good Hope and those sort of places that I think people tend to only really hit the big places.
Exactly.
And neglect the smaller towns, and I think some of the best evidence can be found there. Like, for example, Fonteyn.
Exactly. I would never have known that if you guys hadn't told me that.
I wouldn't have known that Fonteyn existed if I hadn't been doing research. But it's honestly the most charming little town, and like we've spoken about, just so haunted.
So that's what Fonteyn reminded me about. It reminded me about Kimberley. It's also, Kimberley's a very small town, in a lot of ways still set in the past. It's a very different lifestyle from when I was there and then when I came to Cape Town. And Kimberley gave off that very similar feeling that Fonteyn did. So yeah, I definitely think we would get quite a few things.
Yeah, I don't know. But speaking of hometowns and stuff, I know East London. I don't think there's as much because it's not as historically rich as maybe Kimberley is, but I've got a lot of personal experience in East London with houses specifically. But yeah, I think it would be really cool if before we get to things like the Stanley Hotel, we started off in our hometowns and did a little investigation there.
Yeah, start off locally with what we know, and it's what we grew up with. It's the places that formed us. So
yeah,
I think having a familiar ground and just actually knowing the places to go does stand you in a good chance to get best evidence.
Definitely. So hopefully in the near future we can come back with stories of our adventures in Kimberley and the Stanley Hotel, and regale you with our paranormal experiences.
And if you guys have any ideal locations, then definitely think about hitting them up. Sometimes you just need to go on a feeling, the atmosphere that's set, then yeah, you
Just
never
do
know.
it. But thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed learning a bit more about our favorite locations, and hopefully it inspires you to go check out yours. In the next episode, we're going to be diving into the animal kingdom when it comes to the paranormal, so hopefully you guys are going to enjoy that. Freaky Fridays, hosted by Devin Beatty
And Megan Portnoy, and produced with the generous assistance of Janu Blau.
and Blended Podcasts.
Brought to you by Blended Audio.